All right, so this is a panel about the US presidential elections, the process, and we are going to look at it as a game, not as a moral or ethical choice. So I want to start off by meeting the panel. Yes, that's the picture up there. Just a wood panel. Why don't you start down there?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Fred Wan. I've worked on mostly analog tabletop stuff. I worked on a game called Legend of the Five Rings for about 15 years. I've also done some digital CCG work.
Hey everybody, my name is James Portnow. I'm a game designer by trade. I've worked on games ranging from the Call of Duty series to Farmville. And I write a show on the interwebs called Extra Credits.
I'm Chris Hazard. I run Hazardous Software. Some of you might know us from the 2011 game Acorn, the Time Travel RTS. We mostly do serious games, and I have a PhD in AI, and we're getting a lot more into that. So games for learning complicated systems is the best way to describe what I do.
My name's Luke Peterschmidt, tabletop game space, collectible games generally, and usually if there's a TV show and a kid's playing a game that involves a toy, like Bakugan or something, that was me. And I grew up right across the street in the middle of politics, which is why this is fascinating to me. This is a fun thing. So as I mentioned, we are not going to talk policy today. That's not because we don't have opinions. I think we all have opinions. But it's valuable to look at games as games. And there's one thing for sure, is that this structure of picking our president is a game. So we're going to do some reviews as if this was a game. In fact, Extra Credits has probably done
We've done a couple.
several really good ones, actually. All right, so we're going to take a look at our game designers, these guys, right? Yes, there were game designers back when our game design community was even less diverse than now.
Some of them had brown wigs.
That's right. So in any game, when you start, the designers have some sort of intent, something they're trying to reward players for doing with victory. And I like to think about the designer intent as with this drawing of the Manitar, which is half man, half another man. It's not the greatest of design intents, but the designers had goals. What they wanted the process to do and be, and how they wanted the winner to be picked, generally speaking. They wanted a legitimate president at the end. They wanted a smooth transfer of power, all the stuff you can read up there. They wanted the representative of the will of the people at some level, and I put an asterisk there because we all know they didn't mean all the people at the time. And they wanted to leave power to the states, which is important to remember. We are the United States of America. We are not the United People of America. Anytime you see the word state in a document from that era of the world, of our time period, of our history, that's an important word. It's not meant to be like a state of mind or a state. It's a legal thing. And most interestingly, they really wanted the process to stop the formation of political parties. They tried to create a process for electing presidents that would specifically make it impossible for parties to exist, because they knew the parties were dangerous. This is Alexander Hamilton, the guy who was the most vocal advocate for making sure political parties couldn't exist. That's why we vote on one day originally, because they thought that would make it impossible. That said, this is the guy that destroyed and started the first political party in the United States. That's the rapping version of Alexander Hamilton. So quickly, it sort of fell apart. I don't want to take this whole time up with history, but there is a history of patches, things that have happened in the rules. Right? We've had a constitution, we've had a bunch of things change with states taking electoral college on or not. Interestingly, most of the patches are civil rights movements, allowing new people to vote. National voting age being solidified, that's the last one we've had. But that's where we are. So if we're looking at this as a game, just some definitions, right? We've got the candidates, they're the players. They're the ones who will win or lose. You might think that you're a player in this game, you're not a player, you're a victory point. And you're only a victory point if you vote. If you don't vote, you're a spectator. And if you do vote, you're a spectator. And this is a spectator sport. Spectator sports follow different patch rules than non-spectator sports. And we have rules and we have house rules. One is a law and one is not. All right.
Just to cut you off, Phil.
Yes, please cut me off.
One thing that I think is really telling is that he lists spectators as U.S. citizens.
With an asterisk.
Right. Because it is absolutely, I would argue, clear that the US elections are of so much global importance that everyone cares. And while other countries are not legally interested parties, we are interested parties.
Yes, you have, in fact, as a Canadian, right?
Yes.
You are taking part in an adjacent game. This is a term I was talking through with Chris, which is, there are people they're playing this game, but there are other games happening right next door that affect the game. The press is playing a game. I want the best ratings I can have. That is a wholly standalone game. They win or lose in their own sphere of influence, but that affects the other game. I want to ask you guys, if you think there are any other next door games that are happening, you already brought one up already, right? International policy and politics, they have skin in the game, and this year they acted that way, right, which was new.
Obviously, major businesses, right? And given the campaign contribution options that they have and the result on their business from elections, major businesses are playing the game next door to this one, where the points are dollars.
Yeah, dollar points.
And also major influential organizations, the NRA is a big one, the UCLA, all those different groups are vying for different things as well.
Yeah, I think what we're going to find interesting is those games have had a big power. Only one is protected by our Constitution, which is the press. So if we were going to patch the rules, all those other ones are up for debate.
Well, we did actually decide that business rights are also protected by our Constitution. I mean, we have now decided that they have the same protections in some ways
Yep.
to free speech.
Yeah, the First Amendment has been extended to a lot of different groups.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Can the players control those things?
Indirectly.
So, I mean, all of these things are actually based on what we're calling the spectators for their points, right?
Uh-huh.
But in the long run, the players do have some influence over them.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear that it goes two ways.
Yeah.
I can get better ratings by putting candidate A on my show than candidate B on my show, and I will do so.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and knowing that can make candidate A and B act differently, or can make
Right.
me act differently. Yeah, it's very true. Okay, so up on here are a couple of sort of noodly game design terms that I wanted to throw out at the panel here. Kingmaking is one. Kingmaking is in a game when I can't win, but I can affect who does win. So imagine you're playing a 3-player game, you can't win, but you can affect who does. It's called kingmaking. It's generally considered bad in the game. I think that's a general consensus. Asymmetric starting positions is in a game where you don't start in the same way. In chess, you pretty much start with the same pieces in the same spot. In elections, I don't think you do. Probably not. It's something different. Yes, it's very different.
Well, it's poker where you come to the table with different amounts of money. It's not a poker
Right.
tournament.
Yes.
It's literally walking into a casino.
But
Yep.
I think you're also coming in with different decks. Like, it's much closer to a CCG in that you, as a political candidate, there are certain characteristics about you that, like, how good are you at oratory, that are outside of your ability to entirely control. Like, you can work on it, but and if you have certain strongly held beliefs, be they political, religious, military, or whatnot, it is very difficult to sell something you legitimately think is stupid and don't believe in. And to some extent, your value system, by the time you are a candidate for political office, to some extent, is going to be something that you cannot entirely alter because your true self will slip through sometime.
It is very clear you come from Canada.
Yeah. Is there any kingmaking in presidential policies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
we saw a multi-way race this time around where had certain, especially during the primaries, candidates dropped out earlier, there could have been a very different result.
Yeah, the primaries indefinitely, because there's so many people participating.
And historically as well, like, look at Ross Perot, look at some of the other ones who really shoved it one way or another.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask that question. All right, so two other terms I like is snowball and catch-up. Snowball just means when you're ahead, you get more energy to win. In a poker tournament, when you have more chips, you actually have more options and you have more strength on the table. Catch-up is like Mario Kart. When you're behind, you get better power-ups. And those are two sort of game design terms. These are okay in both cases, used the right way. Catch-up is fine, snowball is fine. Too much of either is obviously bad. Where does that come from in presidential elections?
I think it comes from two places. One, you have people who like, my candidate's going to win, so I'm not going to bother, and then they get lazy and don't vote as much. So that's a negative reinforcement. But then the positive reinforcement is, I really like my candidate a lot. I'm really fired up. I'm going to go vote.
Well, and the other resources, right? I think
Yeah,
they
and
contribute
influence the
money,
others.
that sort of
Yes.
thing. And then on the flip side, I think we also have, as far as a catch-up mechanic, the press. American people like a near thing, right? They love the comeback story. And so when a candidate is ahead, you will see, there's been studies on it, the press will start running the other candidate and be harsher to the winning candidate, so that way they have more of a neck and neck thing to show. So that side game has, again, that influence.
Yeah.
Right? Although ostensibly, there is an issue where the press should also be relatively fair and impartial and in-depth. So there's an argument, well, and again, I'm using, like,
be awesome.
I'm using aspirational language because I'm not getting into whether the press succeeds or fails on those criteria, at least not right now.
Yeah.
And so, intuitively and emotionally, if one candidate is behind and is getting hammered on issues, some people feel like, well, the press is ganging up on the person because
Yeah.
why do they keep hitting the person on the issues? Wouldn't it be more fair to show some of the more positive sides? So it's not necessarily entirely improper or motivated by malign intent or willful neglect. It is merely a statement that that's how the press coverage operates. And for the perspective of being someone operating in the political arena, you're kind of stuck treating that as, that's the constraint, those are the rules I'm operating on under, regardless of whether I like it or not.
It sort of feels like if you have a game master who you're rolling for something, and you don't know if you succeeded or not, and your game master rolls and said, you made it or you didn't. I feel like the press is a lot like that, where some things will work just great, and other things are like, I did this just right, and then it falls apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the random event indicators that happen, like someone's right about to do something amazing and a plane crashes and all your good work goes away.
Right.
Right, so there's random events, which I think are catch-up too, because it takes people's eye off what's happening to the negative
major
person.
issues.
But press is the big one to me, because press loves the dog race. They love the horse race. They love people neck and neck. I threw up superdelegates on this list. Why do they exist?
I mean, to maintain the one thing that we said at the beginning, the original game designers were desperate to avoid.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, your superdelegates are your influential party members who get to do things like vote in the primary for whomever they want rather than whomever the people voted for, thereby reinforcing the party's ability to choose its candidate.
Yeah, I think it's really neat if you look historically, going through the points that you made before about initially it was every elector got 2 votes, and they could put it to whoever they wanted as long as it wasn't from their own state. And then the person with the most was president, second most was vice president. But then they started really colluding heavily, saying, well, I'll spend my 2 points on this person if you spend it on this person. And parties basically formed via an economy of those election points.
Well, and then we also hit the problem of what happens when your president is the guy who's bitterly opposed to the policies of the guy who gets elected as your vice president. So we had to take that whole thing apart.
Right.
There's actually a lot of iteration. Like, we enshrine the Constitution, and I think rightly so in some ways, but we have to remember, from a game design perspective, we've iterated on this design a great deal. I mean, this is not our first Constitution that we always talk about. We had our Articles of Confederation, which were terrible and fell apart because we didn't have a federal system. And so we always have to look at these things and say, okay, why did we make those iterations, right? What did we find out? Where was it falling apart? And that also guides us in the future. And I don't think we're done, right? A lot of times we think of the Constitution as a dead document, as a historical document, right? But I think it's valuable that we think of it as a living, iteratable document. And I think it's important over the next 20 to 50 years, I think we're going to make some more changes.
And historically as well, there's a lot of amendments at the beginning. Oh, we got a few things wrong. Then throughout the 1800s, there's very few amendments.
Right.
And there's another flurry of activity again in the beginning of the 1900s. And we've had sort of a dry spell again for the last, 40, 50 years, something like that?
Yeah.
And in some ways, we found other ways than directly altering the document to do some of that iteration. Actually, in fact, some of the changes to the document were to allow us to better iterate without having to go through that whole process.
So it's like a live
Interstate
patch.
Commerce Clause. It's what defines everything.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like if you had, before if you had a bug on the first day release of your game, you had to ship new
Right.
DVDs or CDs or whatever. And now they can do it kind of online, sort of.
Well put.
So superdelegates are interesting. When I put up the victory points and I said if you voted that you're a victory point, you're sort of a sub-victory point. You earn the real victory points of Electoral College. And it's that United States bit. There is a reason why states have that control to do whatever they want. Those superdelegates are put up by the party, and there's pretty much no law that makes parties exist. The First Amendment is what allows parties to not be killed. So those superdelegates were invented by parties, and the states agreed to them in a way that I am sort of confused on. But it happened because there was an election once where the vast majority of Democrats in a primary voted for candidate A, and candidate B took the nomination because he did a better job schmoozing the electoral college members. And they said, that's bad, that shouldn't happen. But it's kind of gotten out of hand. All right, so heuristics in a game real quick are how you get better at a game. And they can be ranked from cloudy to muddy. Do you know how to get better? I'm sorry, muddy to clear. Do you know?
No,
cloudy to muddy would
correct.
that'd be the worst game ever. So a clear heuristic game would be like track and field. It's really clear how to get better. You exercise, you get a coach,
Better
you
do it.
train, you run quicker. Yeah. Some games are very hard to tell how you can get better. And this I put in there because this gentleman right up here asked me a question during setup. Yeah, what was it? If we were going to talk about polling.
Polling, yeah.
Yeah, so this is fascinating for this year. Polling tells you your place in a race. It's a snapshot in a win chart that says, I have a this % chance of winning. And your actions flow from that. And this last year, information was bad.
Well, so it's not.
It was directionally bad.
So across the board in a lot of different elections, not only U.S. presidential election, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Brexit has
absolutely.
The same problem. Brazilian elections have the same problem. But I like to think of it more as, it's weird when we talk about heuristics versus metrics, right? But I think that when you're polling, your sort of fundraising, all these things are metrics for the candidate to measure how they're doing. And the problem is that if you've got the wrong equation or you're measuring the wrong thing, your metrics are either useless or worse than useless,
Yeah,
right?
and your heuristics flow from that.
Right.
If I'm behind, this is
Exactly.
what I should be doing.
And-
And if I'm ahead, this is what I should be doing.
So I'm going to bring in the current election as an example.
Yeah.
But a lot of the polls showed Hillary Clinton ahead for a great deal of the time. As such, I think she decided tactically to play the game differently, right? She decided to play defensive. If I don't rock the boat, I will win because I'm ahead. And by not actually acting in a way that she might have, if she knew she was behind, I think that led to a group of strategic decisions
Yep.
where you end up with losing because your metrics were bad.
Now, we have one foreigner on the panel. Does Canada have a ban on releasing polling information like some countries do?
Britain does,
Close
yeah.
to the. How does it work in England? I'm not familiar with it at all.
England, I don't know at all. Actually, I'm not up to speed on whether or not there's an actual ban. I know that, like, I believe exit polling happens, but generally because we get everything done much faster than you guys do, it's not
Rough.
much faster than you guys do. It's generally not that much of a newsworthy issue because
Oh, you call for elections, then you have elections. We have the 2-year run-up.
yeah, right. Like there have been more than a few years where we start after your primary process is concluded and we're done before your election happens.
Yeah, we have a very long process in this country, which was probably not intended either.
And we should at some point talk about how, from a game perspective, that process, why that process has expanded. Because I mean, our original elections were not 2 years, right? And literally the day of the election, I saw news coverage talking about the next election,
Yeah.
right? And so it's arguable that we're starting an entire cycle ahead. So at some point, I would love to talk about why the game has gone from a game that used to take 30 minutes to the 4.5-hour game as the regular way to play.
We make the rules up. So do you think that's because it used to take that long to get your party behind you? Because that's certainly the game candidates have played in the past. But that's not why it was on the news. It was on the news because that's what people want to read about.
Right. But I think
prime
that's
to.
but I
Yeah.
think that's part of that interlocking game systems, right? Because the news is talking about it. Well, I think it's because nobody wants to get behind, right? And so if I'm not running when the news starts talking about it, then I am behind, as we talked about, asymmetric starting positions. Therefore, we're going to start as soon as the news wants to start, and the news wants to start as soon as possible because once this election is done, they've run out of interesting things that's going to get them ratings, right?
It's sort of a tragedy of the commons in some
Yeah.
way of no one wants to start that early, but if someone does, then they beat you to the punch. They already have a little bit more momentum.
Quick question, does everybody know the term tragedy of the commons? Just raise your hands if you do. That's about half. I think we should probably explain tragedy of the commons real quick.
So tragedy of the commons is let's say you've got a nice little pond here and a bunch of people around it. And they'll fish, and it's great. They get a lot of food, but if they overfish, everyone's incentive is to get more fish because they want to eat more. But then eventually there's no fish. And that's where everyone's incentive is to make the thing worse. And if they all cooperated, it'd be a little bit better, but no one has the incentive to do so.
And you have the reinforcing incentive of when people realize that you're going to run out of fish, you fish all the more
Right.
because now if you don't, everybody else can get the fish and you're not.
Right. Yep.
Therefore, further driving the comments. Yep.
Yeah, no one's rewarding the vegetarian in that cycle. That's not happening. All right, so if these are the rules, we've had dominant strategies in the past. By the way, that's the dominant eye test. That's why I put that image up there. That's right, yeah. So pre-16, dominant strategies. How did people run? How did people win, and how did people think they needed to act to win? This last election is we'll talk about next, but I mean, money used to be the thing, and money was a thing. Organization was a
money
thing.
is still a thing. I would disagree that money has stopped being a thing. It's just no longer as determinative.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, the candidate that spent far less won this election, so there's something.
Which is an exception.
Right. But I would argue that there was at least a debate on whether or not the dominant strategy was to get out your base, right?
Yeah.
To encourage more of the people who were inclined to vote for you to actually go vote, or to convert people who were unsure, right? We've long ago stopped trying to persuade people who are on the other side of the aisle, right? But there was always that middle ground of undecided voters, and there was for a long time a debate between which of those two was actually the dominant strategy.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, talking about the money not being as much of a thing, we see this in espionage as well. So industrial espionage, spies, those sort of things. It used to be they were largely motivated by money, and that you follow the money, you find them. Nowadays, it's all ideology. And it might also be due to the media. We can talk more about that with why people believe certain things, they believe them more strongly. And now, hey, it's easier if you have this network of people doing espionage for free than you have to pay them.
Yeah.
A panel on radicalization is something I don't want to do and desperately want to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting argument to be made that organization was a dominant strategy. That getting
Sure.
people behind you before the primaries even became public. I mean, this election, it was done to a T by Hillary to win the nomination, but she had a 500 vote lead before it started.
Right.
And that was her using her dominant strategy to make that asymmetric starting position before the gun went off to be so powerful.
You can argue she had a 20-year lead.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the Democratic Party and Republican Party do operate differently. Like the Republican
Yeah.
Party has been much, much better in pre-16 of bringing people up and saying, you're our next person. You're the person that's going to do it. Democrats are a little bit less organized than that, except for this time, I think. But anyway,
At
all right.
least in that area.
Yeah. So the fun ones. Let's talk about fun things that happened in this election. Now, I'm going to say, if something gets talked about here, that's a fun thing that offends you morally because it's morally reprehensible in your mind. That's not why we're bringing it up. We're not going, wasn't that fun? But there were some things done in this election that have never been done before to great effect, I think. And I would love to hear what you guys think was the most effectful thing you've never seen in politics before.
I would liken it to rock, paper, scissors. If you play rock, paper, scissors, and you're thinking, all right, I'm in this guy's head, or this gal's head, or whatever, I know they're going to play rock, so I'm going to play paper, and so you think through it. And I feel like before, was kind of the demonstration. We're all trying to reason and guess, what are they going to do next? And then here's somebody who just rolls a die and uses a random number generator, and it does things like I didn't expect that at all. There's no past history for this, and it surprised a lot of people.
See, I feel like it's more like rock, paper, scissors, bomb, where one person's playing rock, paper, scissors, and the other one just keeps insisting they have the bomb. What was really interesting for me was the absolute, the creation of a second information source other than the news, which was not intended to be an accurate information source, right? This co-opting and replacement of the news is something I had never ever seen. So finally people were like, oh, there's this other game that influences our game that's being played parallel. Well, how about we just take over that game too, right?
Yeah, the House rule of you hold press conferences, you answer questions, you talk about
Right.
topics was thrown away. It was just taken out. Why do I need to? There's no rule in our Constitution that says, by the way, when the press asks a question, you have to answer.
Right.
In a lot of multi-agent systems and dynamic systems research, big math terms for systems over time. You find phase changes, just like when you have ice or you have water, and then you cool it, it gets a little colder, and all of a sudden it freezes and it's totally different.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you look at journalism for the past 100 years or so, we've seen, it's been pretty steady for quite a long time. And then we have these bloggers, this internet's a new thing. And then slowly over time, they start becoming the new journalisms. And in the past 5 years, the media's changed dramatically very quickly. And I think we've seen a phase change now that we've got this fake news, we have all these other sources, and it's thrown it into disarray.
I think, and this isn't so much a game strategy, it's just a general observation, that we've reached this kind of critical point where there's so much data that people can't tell casually whether that data is reliable at all, and there's a lot more, how much do I trust the source, even when it comes to analyzing the relevance and accuracy of the source's data, where just to finish the thought, you'll see people, I'll use Donald Trump as the example, where someone would be shown a video of Donald Trump saying something, and they would be like, no, this has to be a lie because it's from CNN. It's just not true, period. And I don't think we have had that level of vocal, echoed disbelief in what would normally be treated as fact.
Yeah.
Up until this cycle, so I'm not even sure it's an evolution of journalism. I actually feel like it's a new substitute product for journalism has emerged and has been consumed, that one of the game players was aware of and using, and the other thought was cheating.
Well, there's this problem that you bring up that the new dominant strategy was, let's see how hard we can lean into confirmation bias, right? And
Confirmation bias just means you're much more likely to believe something you want to believe than believe something that goes against your current beliefs.
which is, as we've just proven, great for winning elections, but when that election the goal is to govern a country, I think that what we've now, one of the other things we saw is the final divorce of the election and the point of the election, right? Elections used to be about governance. Yes, let's see it. And now elections are about elections.
Yeah. So I want to mention one last thing on the strategies. In politics, in previous elections, there was this inside election offices, there was this ping pong metaphor being used, where in previous elections, if someone lobbed an assault at you, you had to lob it back because somebody lost a campaign once when they just let those things sit. And I think what happened this time is someone said, I'm never going to lob one back. I'm going to fire 10. There's a thing in fighter pilots jargon called the OODA loop. It's observe, orient, decide, and act. 2 fighter planes, they're going like this, and the person who wins is the person who gets through that loop first. I observe where I am, I orient myself to you, I decide what I do, and I'm going to act. If I've done that 3 times and you're still going through your loop the first time, you're dead. And this campaign was that to me in a nutshell. Somebody was making decisions 20 times a day, 13 of which could have been meaningless and pointless, but it didn't matter because the other person didn't know what to do. They could never observe and orient and decide and act because by the time they were getting to act, everything had changed on the field. It was too target-rich of an environment to make a decision.
And to extend that the ping pong analogy, imagine you have somebody like a Shiva-like creature with like 6 or 8 arms, and some of those serves are just going to fall over to be bad serves, which are the fake news and all that sort of stuff. But a couple of them might hit, or a couple of them might be perceived to hit. And now if you're playing against somebody who's really good at ping pong, this is gonna be a tough serve, but maybe I can return it. Yeah. Somebody who throws those 6 at you at once, maybe you hit 1 off the table and that's it.
And then if you want to be on the winning side, which we all like to be on the winning side, we root for teams because we hope they win. That's why we root for sports teams, not because we like to see them do well. We want to see them win. If you know nothing about this ping pong analogy other than one of them is a Shiva-like person with 8 arms, which side do you want to be rooting for? We have a natural inclination to want to root for the more active, the more aggressive, more likely to win. And in this case, yeah, the amount of news coming out of one person was with Donald Trump, and I'm going to just call him who he is, they all know, was so dominant and sucked up so much oxygen that when you hear, in my mind, people say Hillary Clinton should have done X or Y, they don't understand she had no ability to do X or Y. She was locked out. She was boxed out.
She also failed to ever nail him down on anything. Right?
Doesn't matter.
Because this is to me the first election that has not been about policy at all.
At all.
Right? I mean, I've literally in my life, I've never seen an election where you could have 0 policy plans from a candidate, much less the winning candidate.
All right, so is our game broken? Is our game doing the job it's supposed to do?
Okay, so we need to first define what it's supposed to do.
Broken is the designer's intent from earlier. Does it do that? Do the people have a representative person in place to do what they want him or him to do?
How are you defining? Well, if you're defining this as the person who took office is the person who won the most electoral votes from the state.
That's right.
And no more than that.
Yeah.
Then the game is doing what it was designed to do with the
Well,
rules
there was some things about smooth transition of power. We had that.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've had that.
Not yet. We haven't had that yet. Okay. We're a few days away from knowing.
And I mean, I think that for the first time ever in history, we've had somebody say, I will not accept the results of a presidential election if I don't
Yep.
win, right? So, I mean, we fundamentally call in question the root of our democracy, whether or not our elections are rigged, right?
But it's okay because he won, right?
So, but even now,
Now he's
right,
poking the bear, sorry.
even with the like Russian hacks and stuff, everyone I've seen on either side questions the fundamental validity of an election.
The
which is
quality, I guess the question is, was the game designed to get us the best quality person or the person the people most want to have?
So I would argue that the founders were aiming for the person of the highest quality because they believed democracy over the long run ensured that way that monarchy didn't. And in that case, it's broken.
However, you would not have designed an electoral college if you did not envision the person with the lower popular vote score getting the office. Like
Yes.
that's
Well,
the point of having the electoral college.
The Electoral College is in my mind, the part that is actually broken. Because it didn't function the way that, we wouldn't accept it. I mean, right now, we
Right.
would not accept the Electoral College the way it's supposed to function. It's supposed to function because all of us in this room, were thought by the founders to not be smart enough to pick the person to be the president. We were thought to be smart enough to pick the smartest person we know and have them pick that person. Because we all have day jobs. Somebody's job was to be good at that. I'm not a doctor. I'm gonna find a doctor to be good at that.
Well, there's some
and we
validity.
didn't do that. If the Electoral College wouldn't vote with the popular people in this country, it would be crazy.
Well, look at it. Look at it from another perspective. Suppose you're a day trader in stocks, and you're like, oh, I can, I do something else during the day, but I also trade a bunch of stocks. Well, odds are you're not going to do so well because there's people who spend their entire careers, entire lives studying this sort of stuff. And I think that the founders' intent was, let's find these electors who their job is to do the research and really dig into these candidates so you don't have to, as opposed to this big media spectacle.
But you can trust somebody.
Yes.
There's a great quote I should have put in here. It's about why the Electoral College exists, to stop someone from winning office who has the raw power of popularity, or the gross power of popularity, something like that. It was specifically designed because in the founding of our country, we were very passionate. There were passionate people who wanted to do passionate things. I mean, for every John Adams, there was a Sam Adams, right? There was a person who was like, yeah, let's go. And they knew they didn't want those people in charge. There's a reason Sam Adams never got a cabinet appointment to anything.
But I mean, they also had historical examples, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Republics from Greece and Rome to Italy in the Renaissance. They saw, I mean, they even looked at England, right? And they saw the dangers that raw populism could bring. That's why we have checks and balances, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Tragically, I'm supposed to go give the opening talk for the Game Jam. So, I've got a dash. You want me to answer this one?
No. If you need to go.
Oh, sir.
No, head out.
I will be back, though, as soon as I can get done with the Game Jam.
All right.
I'll give a really short speech, make a game, and then I'll come back.
Okay, go, make it.
I mean, well,
My stuff here.
Tell them we're all, tell them we're all behind
I
you.
don't believe you, man.
Thank you all for coming to this
So I need to take a jacket to the panel. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Alrighty, so what's going to happen in the future? Can we patch this system?
Can you? Yes. Is there a desire from the people who have the ability to patch? Like, your programmers are the people who are the ones being voted in.
So if I was to tell you, if you had a political system and you were the king or the queen, you had all power, how often would you schedule elections? Never, right?
I'm in a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah. And if let's say your people said, yeah, but what if you die? Who would you decide would take over for you when you died? Right? You're probably hoping your kid, because you think they're the least likely to kill you. I mean, that didn't work out for everybody, right? So we had that problem. That's the example I give for your problem. The people in charge of the patching are the people who are benefiting from whatever current disbalance exists in the rules right now. Sorry to cut you off that, but I love an example.
Right? So, is the capacity there in the system? Yeah. Is that capacity likely to be exercised because of the way the system is designed?
I
I
think
leave that to you, as like a human, human stuff
with
here.
enough pressure, you can get some things to change. The last amendment of the Constitution, by the way, was to change so that senators could not vote their own salary increases.
Yeah.
There was enough popular distaste for that, finally, that it only affected the ones who came in after them. But it takes a lot to make that sort of a change.
Yeah, and we haven't seen, we're a deeply split country, right? I mean, not only I think the things that made us broken on this system are the things that put the current people in power, so they have no desire to change it. But even if it didn't, we're split so close to 50-50, and our Constitution doesn't change on 50-50. We couldn't get the ERA amendment done, right? What sounds like the most sensible, logical thing in the world, and we couldn't get it done.
So I have actually two patch ideas from game theory.
All right, go.
Yeah, so one of them is something that actually is used by BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and a couple other companies, where there's a partnership model. And how do you vote for who's president or CEO of the company? They vote this every some number of years. And the way it works is they use something, we use plurality voting, which means that the person with the most votes wins. There's many other systems like approval voting, where you vote for everybody you like, and the person with the most wins. You can rank them in order. There's board of there's a whole zoo and taxonomy of different types of ways of voting. Well, in here they use what's known as the instant runoff voting. There's pros and cons, Arrow's incompleteness theorem, I can talk for hours about that. But where you need to get 50% of the vote to win. If no one gets 50% of the vote, the worst people are dropped, and then you have a revote. So there's some sort of an order of preferences. You can do this all with one ballot sheet. It's not that hard. You just circle, here's my number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what you do is, the first time that a candidate needs to win, they just need 50% of the vote. They just need to, after instant runoff, they get at least 50%. The next time, they have to win 55 or 60%. And then every time, every additional election, they can run as many times as they want, but it keeps on ratcheting up, getting harder and harder for them to win. Now you never have a lame duck. Now so it's an infinite repeated game instead of a game with a finite horizon, which is an entirely different type of game. You can't use discount factors, all sorts of mathematical properties that make this really powerful. And now you can throttle and adjust the rate of the percentage points that they need to get elected with the frequency of elections, and it all works out nicely mathematically.
Yeah, that discount factor basically means, if I get it right, I think, towards the end of a president's term, their ability to get things done becomes less powerful because they can do less for people in the future?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. So I find that one interesting because there's another way to solve that problem, which is with randomness. There are a lot of countries that call for elections. Is that a Canadian word? Explain that to the Americans here who will all go,
Well,
what?
in the Canadian system, the sitting prime minister, anytime before the expiry of the term when the election has to be called, they can choose to call an earlier election. It is often used when a party believes that they have a groundswell of support or they've just passed something that's overwhelmingly popular to try to cement a further majority. It doesn't always work, but that's the underlying thing that it allows people to do.
How much time between I call for an election and votes?
That I don't know off the top of my head because I just haven't had to brush up on it in a while. But again, our system is not as glacial as yours.
And that works really well too. That, like we said, that randomness. So here's your expected value of 2 years or whatever that random number is. You keep rolling the die, and it's an election day next week.
Yeah,
So,
next week. Yeah. So we have. I don't know what we can patch on a constitutional level. I really think that's going to be a challenge. I think our lower level fixes that are more likely are gerrymandering. That's a constitutional issue too, though. That's a big one.
And interestingly enough, there's a states movement going on right now. I think there's 20, I've got the number wrong, but something like 28 states, 20 states, something like that, that just like how they moved before to, initially when the electors decided to, they started politicking all their points and forming coalitions and parties and things. The states realized, hey, we don't have enough power, so we're going to make a law saying that all the electors have to vote the way this particular state voted. And that changed everything. Then all of a sudden, another state said, well, if we don't do this, we don't have enough power as the other states. And boom, you ended up with a punctured equilibrium. Before there was this is how you play, and all of a sudden someone discovers a new strategy, a new winning strategy. Now everybody does it. And some states now, specifically the states that are voting more democratically, are saying, okay, we will enact a law such that when a sufficient number of other states enact this law as well, we will turn all of our electors towards the winner of the popular vote of the country. And it's interesting from the game theory perspective because it's a way that you can say that you can position yourself such that this law will take place, but it'll only happen once a majority of states. So it's sort of like a slow burn or a wait and see constitutional amendment without forcing it. And nobody wants to do it until sufficiently number of states do that. But I think I'm not sure if that'll happen or not. I think that a lot of people are kind of on the fence about whether or not it will, but I think it's an interesting attempt.
And a lot of the states that have not passed it are the ones that, in terms of like, their disproportionate number of electoral votes is important to them.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
it gives them their voice. And so turning their votes to the winner of the popular vote would probably, on a practical level, reduce their amount of political bargaining leverage. So it is probably against their interests if you look only at that one issue.
I think we could see California split into multiple states in the 30-year time frame. California is outrageously large. It's insane. And it's it's the 8th biggest economy in the world if it was a country. It's crazy, right? And they're underrepresented in Washington, which is doubly crazy. You would think they'd be twice as represented because they pay the majority of the taxes of the country. So them splitting into 4 or 5 states would have a fascinating effect. It would mess up our flag, which is all nice and 50. But it would give them 8 more senators. Yes?
Okay, so California has actually tried to do that before.
Yeah.
I'm actually from San Diego, and there have been multiple times where the northern part of California has tried to introduce legislation to split from Southern California. If that happens, Southern California's economy would tank. Northern California is the money producer. Southern California just kind of banks off of them.
So the LA area, San Diego is the bleacher. I don't think putting state lines would affect economies because states are states. They might not be able to tax the same rates. They might not be able, because California is a really high tax.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. It would affect their governor's power, which is I think the number one reason it doesn't happen. The governor of California has tremendous power because they run the 8th largest country in the world.
And speaking of power and voting, this gets us to a really important game theory topic called the Shapley value, which is a measure of power of some coalition. So imagine you've got 5 people who are all trying to make a decision, and or they're all trying to accomplish some goal. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe making a decision, and somebody carried the table, and somebody just carried a little bottle of water, and the person who carried the table, well, that person did more work, so they should get a more lion's share of the outcome. What the Shapley value does is it looks at all possible combinations of the players. So what if we only had the guy who carried the bottle of water? Well, maybe you didn't get that much, but maybe you had this other guy who didn't do anything, but that guy could have carried everything. And so what is the contributed value from any given set or subset of what's known as the power set, all possible combinations? And we look at that contribution of that group. And we can take that over the distribution of all possible groups and say, here's the value that you brought to this outcome. And it's an awesome mathematical value, it's great properties. It is almost impossible to compute on anything that is non-trivial in size.
Yeah.
But if you can extend this analysis a little bit using what's Bayesian math, probabilities and things like that, and you can show that almost any system, any voting system, has different power exchanges and different power of different coalitions. So even though that we have the principle in this country of one person, one vote, and we like to keep it that way, it's mathematically virtually impossible to get that across different coalitions. So based on here's a coalition that is always going to vote this way, here's a coalition that's always going to vote this way, they have different powers than one who votes another way. And it's all measurable, but it's very convoluted.
When you hear someone say the Electoral College was designed to ensure that people wouldn't just go and try to campaign and sort of cow down to 4 or 5 states, the biggest powerful states, always tell them now they just cow down to a different 4 or 5 states that are smaller and less important. I mean, legitimately less important for the economy of the country and the.
Or 4 or 5 cities, or whatever. However you break it down,
Yeah.
there will be some set that is more important than others.
Yeah, I mean,
Or easier.
right now where I live in the middle of Pennsylvania, and yay, Pennsylvania.
Where in the middle of Pennsylvania?
Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Every New Year's, we slowly lower a large bologna from a crane.
Ours is a beaver.
Beaver, there we go. We're all good. So I live in an area that's very politically interesting now because a lot of people look at my area and say, these are the voters that moved an election. And I'm like, okay, but that was still only 60,000 or 40,000 people in a state of millions. It's just that power curve is off a lot. All right, so predicting the future, you're back. We haven't even moved yet.
Okay, give me a moment to think about this.
All right.
And Fred, have you done yours?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, that's all right.
Oh, hey, wait, recap for me quickly so I can think while.
We don't believe the constitutional amendment is coming. I think California might break into 4 or 5 states in 30 years time frame. just because they're underrepresented in every way.
In the Shapley Valley, it makes things hard.
Oh, and the challenge we have of the person being in charge of making the changes and instigating the changes is also the person who benefits from the current state.
I was going to actually talk about the fact that the people playing the game write the rules,
Yeah.
and how we are going to have to. One of two things will happen. We will either fix that problem, or we will descend into a Mad Max anarchy. So, one of those two.
Well, I mean, let's be clear. Electing somebody who is deemly unqualified for a job, or is not the person who was designed to be the person who won, doesn't mean we didn't get the person we deserved,
Right. No,
right? Yeah, or chose.
There's an additional facet that not only are the people who are writing the rules deciding what rules to change,
Yeah.
they're also the ones who get to decide who interprets the rules. So they're deciding
Yeah.
who the refs are.
Yeah.
And that's by design,
Yeah.
right? It is by design.
Well, the people write the Constitution.
Anyone here familiar with Nomic? The game Nomic, anyone heard of that or familiar with it? So it's a game, you all roll a die and you go in a circle, and then that's the number you get. You write it down, first person to 100 wins. There's also one other rule. During your turn, you can propose an amendment to the rules, all of which are laid out in a constitutional form, and then everyone else gets to vote. If that vote is accepted, that rule, that constitution is amended, and that changes the game. So the game is deliberately boring to get people to push on and change these rules. There are games that have been running on the internet for like 15, 20 years or more that you look at it, and it looks just like legal documentation, like you need a lawyer to go through this. And that's the sort of thing that happens when you get people who make the rules of their own game.
Yeah. You know, we have a great example in basketball. Game designers love basketball because we know every rule change that's ever happened. I can tell you the day the three-point lane violation became a rule in basketball because one game, one guy roughed up everything on the team, and there was one fewer ref than there should have been that day. And the next day, they changed the rules. This is why I wanted to make that point about this is a spectator sport. They change the rules of basketball, they change the rules of football every year, and hockey every year, because they know they have a responsibility to people who aren't the players. And that responsibility is to make the game entertaining or do what it's supposed to do. Be entertaining, reward the best boxer, not the one who runs away all the time and scores 1 point, right? You know, one jab. So we have a problem that our spectators are not being treated because we don't have a third party saying, you know, we have a job here other than winning, because we don't.
So, what do you do? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that have changed in the last 15 or so years, right? That we are a fundamentally different society, not only than when this was founded or 100 years ago, but even during the original Clinton administration. I think that there are a lot of things we can do to encourage people to vote and to encourage people to get accurate information, but how do we approach that, right? Like, the internet has radically changed everything about how we do elections.
Yeah.
We have yet to catch up with that in terms of our legislation. How do we approach that?
It's going to be almost impossible. So, we're going to lose 20 or 30 years. So, anyone here a chemist? Okay, I'm a chemist. That's my degree is in. And I was terrified when I graduated because of food chemistry was getting so good. And by that I mean it was very easy for a chemist to make you, it started off nice. It was like chemistry and food chemistry. We're going to make food that travels and doesn't spoil. And then we're going to make food that we can make lots of really cheaply and feed lots of people. This is great. And then they started messing with your brain. And they started doing things with food that made you like a food in an unreasonable way. Like, we're going to put salt and fat in here in a way that you don't even really taste, but your brain knows it's there, right? That level of brain science is in politics now.
Yeah.
So when we talk about understanding logic, there's a whole lot of science that's showing sort of your two levels of your brain, that no matter how much you teach someone, if they've already formed their opinion, when you challenge them with new data, no matter how real it is, the core of their brain will only fire up the parts in the outer brain that support their existing position. It is a problem for us as a people that I think the people running elections now are better at our brain than we are. And that is a very dangerous spot that's going to take us some failure to get through. We had to go through massive obesity to start even looking at food. I think we're going to have a catastrophe or two, some very corrupt administrations, and we have to start teaching logic at a young age. Logic is a real science and a real skill, and it matters, and we don't teach it because there's a reason I guess, that we don't. It should be taught as a science.
We're justification machines, and there's ways you can get people to even change their opinion in 5 minutes. You can ask them, what do you think about some issue? And then you get them to mark it down, and then you lead them for a little while, a few minutes, and you make them believe that they had suggested something to the contrary. 5 minutes later, you ask them what their opinion is to mark it down, and they will write the opposite. It is very doable, and it's kind of amazing about how good at justifying our actions, even if regardless of whether or not we agree with them.
Well, and it's interesting because there has been a lot of study of this during this last election of when confronted with data which is fairly definitive against a point of view, rather than actually convert people, if just confronted with the data, it actually re-entrenches their position. And so in a democracy, right, we have this problem. A democracy depends on an informed electorate.
Yep.
And yet, the information, we exist in a disinformation age, right? When we created the internet, we all celebrated the day that information was going to be public and free and available to everyone. But here's the issue. True information takes more work to convey, because sometimes it's not going to be interesting and sometimes it's going to be complicated. False information you can intentionally engineer to be both interesting and non-complicated. And so overall, the more we've run into this situation where this unlimited access to information means that more disinformation is being spread faster than real information, simply because of the nature of those two products. And so how do we get ourselves back to an informed electorate? I mean,
So actually, here's some science behind that. If you look across the board, across systems that exist in hostile environments, I mean everything from ants to your immune system, to your inhibitory neurons that prevent you from flailing around, to immune system, to nation state spending and defense. Almost universally, entities need to spend about 20 to 25% of their resources, 15 to 25%, on defending themselves. Like all resources, the amount of resources spent towards soldier ants, feeding them, nurturing them, all those sort of things. However, in computer security, for example, we only see 3 to 8% of the IT budget spent on security, and that's why things are so easy to hack. Well, what percentage of your time do you spend validating the facts and the information you consume? Is it anywhere near 20%? If not, that's a problem.
You're below the historical norm.
Yes.
What's interesting is we call the internet democratization.
right.
Yeah, we actually used the term that makes it sound like, yay, everybody.
I remember.
And I want to be like, yay, everybody but my neighbor, Jenny, I hate her.
I don't really see a solution realistically coming from top down, because the players don't want more players. They want NPCs. I would actually.
That's really good.
I would actually think it's a lot of systematic societal solutions and techniques that we've had to develop slowly anyways, because we all knew there was so much information out there from the moment we were all connected. There's just more than you can process. What's important?
Mm-hmm.
And for example, one of the things I encourage my personal friends to not do at all is, when you're talking about a complex issue, don't speak in memes at all. At all. Because merely by communicating in meme, you are implying that a complex issue can be boiled down to a simplistic expression, which is often just not true. It's just completely not the case that any issue that's really worth examining can be summed up fairly and comprehensively in a two-liner. It might be a good way to capstone a discussion you've just had, but it is probably not a comprehensive treatment, and many issues are far more complicated than we like to think they are, or even realize they are, because Dunning-Kruger is still a real thing.
And every place, and every complex system is going to have like a bunch of stuff that's really good and some stuff that's bad.
Yeah.
And it's way easier to harp and be negative. We all know this. Like, you put a post up that says, I can't believe the terrible thing person B did. You're going to get a lot more posts, a lot more clicks than if you put up,
Right.
hey, this person did some good things and some bad things. Right? So you focusing on the negative is really powerful.
And you can't change the nature of the business environment in which the media is operating. That is beyond the scope of what an individual can realistically do, unless they are already players in the system.
Yeah.
But on a personal level, I do think most of us can recognize that simplicity should not be our goal. It should be comprehensiveness and clarity.
So, I'm going to raise something that. How much time do you have left?
I don't know. How much time is this? 8 minutes.
Oh, this is going to be super uncomfortable for the last 8 minutes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So, Comprehensiveness should be our goal, absolutely. But we exist in a world today, modern film and television and video games are so much more engaging than anything that people had back when we founded this country. I mean, back then, the cool, fun thing to do was to go down to the pub and debate politics. Like, that was entertainment. What do we do about the fact that, yeah, we want comprehensive, but for a lot of us, myself included, I mean, I keep feeling like I need to get involved. Like, I should actually run for something because, I mean, we need more people to just tilt the lance and go.
At windmills.
But, right, exactly. But we have a life that is incredibly comfortable. I'm not starving. Like, my time with, I'd rather write and think about games and play games and go to movies, and a lot of our communication is about some of these other things. So what do we do about the fact that we've actually, created this opiate for ourselves that, honestly, I wish I lived in a time where I didn't want to get involved.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there's a quote, and a butcher, and I don't remember who said it. I'm you to help me remember. It's one of the founding fathers, or somebody back then, who said, we today are warriors, such that the next people can be, our next generation can be politicians, such that the following generation can be poets. And I feel like we've kind of achieved that in a way. We live a very easy life. We consume all of this media. Some of us create some of it, and we're there. Now what?
I think we have some amount of sausage making problem. Like, so there's a great quote in politics, it's fine, just don't watch the sausage getting made. We've stopped being that group. We've stopped being the group that says, let's go behind a room and watch two people who disagree, give each other something that they probably don't want to publicly say they're doing, so they get what they want, and the things move along, and there's some lower level of corruption we've always accepted as a nation. And that is weirdly a problem for us now, because we're not willing to accept that. I think we just got out of an administration, in the Obama administration, that was incredibly honorable. It was not stuck with a lot of scandals, if you think about it. The two sort of thoughts on the Obama administration leaving have been no scandals, still couldn't seem to get much done with the Republicans. And I think that those two things are not separate. I think those two things are the same. I think that we have a weird problem that is only going to be solved by putting in a group of people that are so absolutely corrupt and horrible. And I mean this, that really, I don't mean bad things like nuclear wars happen, but some really bad things happen. Or the over-promising that can no longer be ignored, which we might actually see on healthcare, I think, right now. I think that's actually a tricky issue.
Or the wall, maybe.
No, I think the wall's a simple thing. I think we talk about complex issues. I think
Right.
healthcare is really complex, and it's been very easy to say it's bad.
Yes.
It's very hard to do something
Because there are
else.
more areas of dysfunction in the American healthcare system than just the provider issue.
I don't think it matters that.
Yeah.
It was bad, and now it's theirs.
But how do
So
we
there's
get past the personal inertia, though? Like, I talk to a lot of people about getting involved. I've been trying to get involved, and I've been running, like, youth and politics stuff in Seattle, and...
Then you are involved.
Right, to a limited degree,
Right.
right? But even that, how do we get past that personal inertia where really, like, I'd like the world to be a better place, but man, I have so many better things to do than make it a better place.
What that means is the world's not bad enough for you to trigger it, but it will be bad enough for enough people when enough bad things happen, is what I'm saying.
Punctuated equilibrium.
Yeah. It just won't be you. You will not be the revolutionary you want to be.
Or I mean, that's the thing. Our whole system is designed so it's supposed to have checks and balances that we never get it too bad enough, right?
Yeah.
And I worry when our answer is, okay, how are we going to solve this? Well, by letting everything fall apart,
Well,
right?
Yeah.
Especially...
And I'm the negative guy.
Well-
Everyone I talk to says, well, if you look at the kids of today, I have a lot of positivity. That's like the classic political answer now. What do you think about the future? I'm
the
like,
thing
nope.
is, though, and this is foreigner speaking,
Yeah.
when America's bad enough is global. And there are people in Canada, for example, who are literally not far enough to escape the potential fallout
Yeah.
of disaster.
Yeah.
Right?
I
Or-
did play that game. I think we actually come in and invade
Right?
you.
Like, we're investing in bombs right now. And the issue is, back when the founding fathers forged the Constitution, the ability of humanity to permanently modify the planet in an irrevocable way wasn't real. It's casual now.
Yeah.
Actually, interesting study came out this year that found that the amount of material made by man now equals approximately the amount of biomass in the world.
Right.
Humans.
Yes.
All right, we had one person who wanted a question. I know we're running a long time, but did you have your hand up you want to say?
Yeah.
I know, we have like 30 seconds, so you're like on the radio show. 30 seconds, go.
I found your point interesting about how we have so much other better things to do than get involved, because a lot of what Donald Trump did is he turned the whole thing into a reality show.
Right.
That really drew people's attention.
Yeah.
And actually now if you look at studies, people are more involved in politics than they have been in probably the past decade.
Yeah.
Because
Well-
people are more involved, more obviously for negative reasons than positive reasons.
Yeah.
Not entirely negative reasons, though. If someone cares,
No, and
then maybe you disagree or I disagree
Yeah.
with what they're fighting for.
yes.
But the fact that they are more engaged is probably not a controversial thing that, now it depends on how they express that engagement and what they're fighting for.
Yeah.
But
that's
the
part of
mere
problem with that,
additional
because
engagement,
what I'm talking about, for good or bad, is that people who are against Trump feel more engaged now because they feel they're fighting for something. They're fighting against something.
Yeah, I think we've seen more activity. I mean, we didn't have a very good turnout this year for the actual election.
Oh, North American election turnouts are horrible.
Yeah.
And a lot of, if you look around the world history, a lot of civilizations last for like 2 to 400, 2 to 500
Yeah.
years. So what's going to be that event that changes things for us, for better or worse?
Well, but also a lot of civilizations go into slow decline, right? We may not be the first, best, greatest in 50 years, and then we may have a 300 years of petering out, right? I mean,
See, England. Yeah.
yeah, or right. I was thinking Rome fell, and then Eastern Rome is there for another 1,000 years, right? And getting smaller and smaller and smaller and fractured and fractured and fractured. So who knows? But I mean, I don't want that to happen.
No.
And hopefully we can solve that, but I think we are out of time.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a panel coming in after us here.
If we had 5 more minutes, we could solve it, but sorry.
Because this was the next it was the next panel. It was like, what would your platform be if you were running only to win, not caring about what the actual platform was? But we don't have time for that. We got to go. So
The panels have half an hour between them.
that's it.
The panels have half an hour.